Mads didn't weep. Not anymore, anyway. So when the steel beveled tip punctured the septum, slipping deep within the vial, becoming lost in a milky pink fluid, Mads felt nothing. Almost. Mads had seen the drug work before, and its efficacy at shutting down vital systems so swift and absolutely fascinated him still. The vacuum filled the void, setting the syringe up to the 20 cc meniscus mark, a lethal dose for most. Mads pulled the needle from the vial, studying its viscosity. Why make it pink? He wondered to himself, as he had many times before. It seemed an unnecessarily cruel color choice, since vision has the second longest memory of all senses. It's like the red balloon a kid was last seen holding the day he was abducted from the town fair. That red will haunt his parents until the end of their days. And while Mads knew its chemical and trade names, and its mechanism of action too, he called the euthanasia drug Permanent Pink, and it had killed millions. Mads was caught in a mind loop again, so much so this time that the body on the table in front of him moved unexpectedly, surprising and startling Mads. The gaunt, grisly man strapped to it struggled briefly, until the realization fully set in that any effort to free himself from the 3 industrial-sized winch belts strapping his body down was futile. Catfish Joe, the specimen of a man splayed out on a butcher block table before Mads, had sharp, smart eyes that belied his southern stereotype, that were now intensely focused on Permanent Pink. Impressive, Mads thought, was this man's ability to quickly appreciate his situation. And he didn't even attempt to speak through his bound mouth, focusing instead on controlling his breathing. Self-preservation is mostly energy conservation, Mads had learned. Mads observed Catfish Joe with a serious curiosity. And then Mads broke the silence and suspense, almost apologetically. I didn't anticipate your awakening yet. Anesthetics can be so idiosyncratic, I found. Mads should have gotten the gist correct, as it was unprofessional of him to be so imprecise. But sensing the apprehension coursing through Catfish Joe's system, Mads moved towards the table, set down the pink syringe, and said simply, I've got a message for you. That's all. Mads spoke like a dispassionate clinician delivering a dreadful diagnosis that requires radical surgery to survive. Today, there would be no killing. This was a lesson, and a second chance that Cole was never given. Catfish Joe's tensions eased slightly, affording him the opportunity to examine his surroundings. He was on a mess deck in a ship of some sort, a trawler, he suspected, as most vessels along the Gulf Coast were. Ambient sound suggested they were near a waterway, but as they remained motionless, that meant they were dry docked. Mads noticed that Joe was making mental notes, so he continued. You're mildly sedated, Joe, and mostly unharmed, Mads said unwittingly, resting his right arm on the table before immediately pulling it back. After more than a few seconds, his hard and tight wince turned to an ironic grin. I am too, Mads said wryly. It's a good thing for me you can't shoot for shite, Mads said, lightly cupping his right arm, crudely wrapped in marine tape. The cost of doing business, I suppose. There's always a price for who we are and what we do. And that's why you're here, Joe. You're in the business of killing dogs, Joe. Mads shook his head and index finger simultaneously at the bound man on the table. And that I cannot permit. Mads stood motionless and spoke in a controlled, soft voice. Mads' timbre had a measured severity to it that was spooky-like. You started out as a small channel cat farmer, Mads continued. The etymology of your name, I surmise. You expanded your hatcheries all over the South. And then you met the wrong people with a bad business proposition and decided to diversify into the world of dogfighting. Now, you didn't personally do any of the killing, or else we wouldn't be here talking. Your life would be the price you'd pay for that. But you've been complicit in the deaths of dogs and profited from it too. Mads leaned in on Joe, though this time minding his womb. It seemed natural to Mads to become closer to a man, more intimate when giving him his life choices. Catfish Joe never broke his stare, and surprisingly to Mads, His eyes didn't have a meanness in them. Joe, what path you choose from here forward will determine your outcome. Mads had no meanness in him either. Instead, his eyes sparkled with a brilliant resolve. Path 1. Mads produced a thumb drive from his pocket and showed it to Joe. Is to follow the instructions found here. It'll cost you, well, a lot, but I assure you it's better than Path 2, which will be the Chinese, and they will be apprised of all your business dealings. Making his point clear, it was time to conclude their business as Mads was on a clock. Mads began to pack up his gear, leaving Joe uncertain of what comes next. You can think on it, Joe, and while you do, review the contents of the drive. It'll be on your person when you awake, and provide you with all the data you need to make the proper decision, and reckon your account. Oh, and I'm taking your phone. Mads showed it to him before putting it into his pack. Mads picked up another syringe situated next to Permanent Pink, although this one was filled with a clear, colorless liquid. This is an immuno-labeled biochip, he said to Joe. A marvel of technology that's entirely undetectable and a way for us to track which path you have chosen. Joe stiffened slightly. Not to worry, Mads assured him. It's just saline with a sedative kicker. Mads sunk the syringe into a cannula stuck deep into Catfish Joe's cephalic vein, and within seconds, the powerful drug took effect and the chip made its way through his bloodstream to its intended destination. As Joe slipped into an anesthetic haze, Mads had parting words for him. Aquaculture for sustainable seafood is the future. And then Mads had to be the smart arse he so sweetly loved about himself sometimes. Stick to your catfish, Joe. And then his tone inverted. Or I'll make you my mission mate. Mads' right eye winked unexpectedly, and Mads cursed himself silently for it. It was a nervous tic he'd had all of his life, and he always seemed weak at the most inappropriate times. Some saw it as a charm, Mads didn't. Moments later, Mads walked through a sprawling shipyard with great haste, from part pain and part worry. Mads discovered a contact on Catfish Joe's phone that concerned him. If his instinct was correct, as most days it was, Doc was in danger. Alone, Mads walked amidst his creation he built from nothing. River's End, ship repairing, breaking, and recycling, was a mid-size operation in New Orleans that serviced mostly cargo ships, merchant vessels, and shrimpers. Catfish Joe was correct in his assessment of his surroundings, but what he didn't know was the brilliance behind Mads' operation. Mads had mapped through and prepared for all eventualities, and even if Joe does recollect anything from today, Mads' dry dock was also a forensic front. Dozens of trawlers pass through here every week, and any trace evidence goes out to sea along with them. Most days, Mads would amble about, proudly admiring his operations and looking for inefficiencies, but today he moved with some haste, as his arm hurt like hell. He hadn't determined as yet the extent to which the damage has been done to his bicep, but Mads had more pressing concerns, and that was Doc. Mads walked to the lone vehicle in the lot, a white utility van, and with a couple of clicks, a remote opened its side passenger doors. Mads quickly stowed his gear to get back on the road, back to base camp. But Mads couldn't leave quite yet. He had 2 texts to send, but that was no easy task with a gunshot wound to his arm. Mads' right hand trembled a bit, but he managed to pick out the messages. The first text was to an unknown contact to whom Mads sent the text. Done. On time. Ready for disposition. Mads was the acquisition of Catfish Joe, and his part was done now. The second and more pressing text was to Doc. Hi Doc, need to bring TNT in tomorrow. TNT was a duo of godless dachshunds, Thunder and Tiger, that Mads was kind of an uncle to. The mere thought of them made Mads laugh, even when it pained him like now. As part of his avuncular duties, Mads would take TNT in to see Doc from time to time, but in this case, It was his code for, "We need to meet." Mads didn't want to alarm Doc, but he had neither time nor strength to explain. Mads needed to address and assess his wound. Mads left his gated parking lot, steering his van, left-handed as his right had limited function. Still, Mads drove fast and precise. As a mechanical engineer, he knew how to operate Mads machines with maximum efficiency. And although there were faster routes back to base camp, Mads always went the same way home. Mads drove alongside the industrial canal that splits the lower Ninth Ward and took St. Claude west over into the upper, known as Bywater. Mads crossed the levee that was marked by a sole, rusted, and graffitied sign pointing towards a park at the levee's terminal point that read, "The End of the World." Mads had inquired as to its meaning with as many locals as he could, and not a single one had any answers or even theories. Mads couldn't find one either. Still, Bywater was a fascinating study in zoning laws and city sprawl. Part industrialized wasteland, abutted by vibrant historic neighborhoods, Bywater was a bit of a mystery still to Mads. It seemed to Mads this place hadn't reconciled its past with its future, and in many ways it was the polar opposite to Boston, the city of Mads' birth. Twilight came down across the Crescent City as Mads exited on to the 310 loop south. Mads opened the van's windows, and the rush of briny autumn air washed away some of Mads' radiating pain. It smelled different down here, too. The water, that is, Mads thought. It was something Mads couldn't fully articulate to himself or to others. It was like the two seas, the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic, are of different ages. Mads came down here from New England after Christine died, and he rationalized the sudden life change as a means to understand a woman he never really did. And whether that was his compelling motive or leaving the place of their past together, Mads was still uncertain. Mads never pursued a deep understanding of himself, as he was always too preoccupied with work. And the reason really didn't much matter to him anyway. Mads took to New Orleans as quickly and completely as he took to Chris. A complex confluence of rich, diverse cultures, this place fascinated Mads the more he learned of it. And in a few words, that was Chris. A confluence of so many things, and Mads found her traces everywhere in the Crescent City. And yet both remained a mystery to Mads, Chris and the city. Down beneath its beauty, there are deep, dark roots that grow down into the swamp. Every culture has its past sins, and down here, dogfighting was one of them. Catfish Joe was not an isolated quantity. The South has a long history of hurting and profiting from the pain of our companion animals. It's generational, and as ancient as the live oaks and the Spanish moss that lives on them. Two of the nation's most notorious patriarchs of dogfighting still live in Louisiana, and the universally accepted rules governing them are called Cajun rules for a reason. They come from the bayous down here, and that's where Mads was headed. Nowadays, dogfighting is mostly unorganized and contained, but technology tools have changed the game, giving rise to sophisticated global fight rings. And like all problems that are economic in nature, both the supply and demand sides of the equation must be dealt with, and that probably meant that Mads had to travel to Asia. The pain was pulsating now, and Mads began to drift from distraction, nearly missing a massive cane truck moving into his lane. It's October. Harvest season, Mads thought to himself, and these trucks dominated the roadways. Mads was struggling to remain focused when his phone buzzed, startling him. He reached into his pack, first confusing his phone for Catfish Joe's. It was Doc, and the reply read, "Sure, stop by at 9. Everything okay?" As Mads was having a difficult time driving, he would reply later. Mads took 90 to LA-1 down to base camp, and here, driving down was meant literally. In some places, the descent from the city goes from well above sea level to down below, and some towns have actually been lost to the Gulf. Mads sneaked alongside Bayou La Fourche, the fork that was once a teeming tributary of the Mississippi River and now was dammed up in a seemingly endless stream of boats all the way down the delta. The descent had a secondary meaning too, as Mads passed through dilapidated towns with roadside vendors selling swamp meats of all kinds: turtle, alligator, crawfish, and nutria. This was an ecosystem entirely unknown to Mads. To most people, this was the world's end, and perhaps that's why Mads came down here, into the heart of Cajun country after Chris died. He was lost to family and friends. But Mads saw it differently than most. Mads believed it was here he became found. Mads would have a hard time convincing most that this was found as he drove into a boating park with a loud multicolored electric marquee that read Double D's Dock in curly flowery lettering. The sign irritated Mads' astigmatism every time he saw it at night, but still smiled because he understood the double entendre to it. Mads entered the gated community and drove to his lot, on which a curious structure was built, fabricated from industrial cargo containers and a 5x5 crosshatch design repurposed from his shipyard. Mads drove into the right lowermost, which served as a drive-through garage, and his shop. The 40-foot-long container was lined with workstations, wallboards with rows of tools, and schematics strewn about. Multiple TART vehicles lined the end of his garage, including a hydrofoil, an essential watercraft for the swampland. Mads exited the van, found a roll of blue marine tape pegged to the wall, and made his way into the domicile. Mads entered the main foyer, or the center of his space, an open area with a cable-stay staircase suspended in the center. It looked like a massive steel spoke with stair-like bridges extending out to all four sides of the house. Mads walked to the second level and headed straight into a supply closet next to his bathroom and retrieved supplies in a medical tray to attend to his wound. Adjacent to his bathroom was the kitchen, and Mads walked directly to a center aisle in it and spread his supplies out. Before seating himself on a sole stool next to it, Mads opened the freezer and retrieved a bottle of Irish whiskey and chilled glass from it. Mads removed his bloodied shirt, and once seated at the island, he carefully placed his arm into the tray. Mads had an injury kit ready to go that included local anesthetics and wound care, but pain management was left up to Mads, and that's where the whiskey came in. Mads did not take meds unless absolutely unavoidable, as they reacted differently to him. Plus, pain is a critical signal that one shouldn't entirely disconnect from, but Mads had no intention of being an unnecessary recipient of it. He opened the kit and uncorked a vial of lidocaine, a two-handed procedure that Mads had to manage carefully. Mads extracted the entire vial and strategically injected multiple areas surrounding his taped-up wound. The skin swelled until the drug was entirely absorbed, which was fascinating on most days, but the process couldn't happen fast enough now. Injuries were not uncommon to Mads, in either of his businesses, and Mads had learned that pain has to be localized first, and then managed systemically. Mads poured the Irish whiskey into the glass and took a fine swill. It wasn't an exact science, so Mads took another, because he knew what came next was going to hurt, despite the lidocaine. Removing marine tape from an open wound is especially excruciating, and it must be done deliberately so you won't make a worse mess of it, as Mads had learned. Similar to duct tape, it too frays, but when you want to stanch blood flow lightning fast, there was no better means. Sufficiently numb now, Mads went to work. Mads slowly unwound the tape from his bicep, a frayed, bloody blue mess that Mads wiped occasionally with a surgical towel. Mads stopped halfway, though, to break from the pain, although the lidocaine was mostly effective. As Mads removed the last length of tape, he stopped and stared. Why did he have to shoot my boy? He wondered to himself. Mads stared at his bloodied right bicep, at the tattoo of a Great Pyrenees, barely discernible from the meaty, macerated mess the gunshot made of it. Mads had subdued Catfish Joe fast and efficiently, but not before he popped one off that caught Mads. And while his initial inspection was a superficial wound, he would learn more after cleaning and debriding it. With a giant bottle of sterile saline rinse, Mads saturated the area thoroughly and dabbed the wound with gauze, tossing the blood-soaked ones into his sink. Mads could see Cole better now, and smiling, he raised his glass to him. "Cheers, mate." And as Mads examined the wound with forceps, Mads continued talking to his tattoo. "For Christ's sakes, I've made a mess of it, haven't I?" Cole looked so handsome in his portrait, and it embodied his spirit with an inscription underneath: "Hold fast." In time, the damage would heal, though not well in some places, but at least Mads could repair it. "We all look better with scars," Mads said to Cole, and punctuated it with another swill of whiskey. "My beautiful boy, you took a bullet for me." Mads was rambling a bit now, avoiding the inevitable, and he knew it. Mads doused the wound with betadine and pulled out the dreaded stapler. Mads hated the blasted thing, as no matter how anesthetized or toughened you are, staples always pack a pinch. And Mads shuddered from the sound it made, puncturing the skin. Mads took another drink, and with that one, the glass was empty. As he positioned the stapler and tightened his grip, Mads placed his thoughts elsewhere, on a story about Cole. Hold fast indeed. Cole was fearless, and the two of them stared down many storms together, and Mads thought of the worst one. Click, click. The first staple penetrated Mads, and he winced. Mads thought of the time he and Cole were caught at sea in a merciless storm, with lightning that lit up the sky like an electric killing field. Click, click. Mads pressed his foot hard to the ground to diffuse the pain into the floor, it seemed. That staple caught a nerve. Mads examined his work. Only 2 more, he thought. Cole and Mads were hunkered down in the wheelhouse of their trawler, trying to weather it out. Cole was uncharacteristically shaking, and Mads was trying to settle him. And then Mads noticed giant tufts of white fur floating about and immediately thought Cole was injured. He wasn't. Mads realized it was his hands that were shaking. Cole never flinched. Click, click. A tear formed and fell across Mads' cheek. Mads continued the story in his mind. Hold fast. That was the spirit that was Cole, even when they took his leg from bone cancer, and then after, when it spread, and then up until the end. Cole always held fast. Click, click. Mads wiped the single tear from his cheek and was done. He inspected his work briefly, which he deemed sufficient for the untrained. Mads covered the wound with gauze, then followed it with the blue marine tape. Mads cleaned up the mess, threw his shirt in the bin, refilled his glass with whiskey, and left the kitchen. Time to take the walk, Mads thought. He changed clothes and grabbed his phone and returned to the steel spoke, the center of his home. Mads climbed the spiral staircase up to the rooftop. Inspired from New England coastal architecture, the Widow's Walk is where the wives of mariners would await the return of their mates. Mads wasn't waiting on anyone, but this is where he retired to most nights. Mads' Widow Walk took up half the rooftop and was covered and entirely cased in screen, a necessity for the Delta, where the mosquitoes are the size of sparrows. From here, Mads could see the sky from every point, and it was more of a watch than a walk for him. Even though darkness limited visibility, Mads surveyed the southern horizon over the Gulf of Mexico. A storm was coming. Mads didn't need to see it, or a phone to alert him to it. His body was attuned to barometric pressure, and he could sense it like any able seaman. It was similar to how he knew Doc was in trouble. To what extent, he was unsure, but he had to reply to her text before he passed out. Mads didn't have the strength to reply to Doc's text other than, okay, and after sending it, Mads noticed he missed a call from Dr. Franklin, his chief scientist and a pioneer in the field of comparative oncology. That business, as all other, will have to wait till tomorrow. Mads was sore like hell and starting to lose lucidity. The Widow's Walk was entirely open and undistracted, with two exceptions: a fire pit and Mads' hammock. Mads sloppily mounted his hammock, protecting both his drink and his damaged arm. Handmade from braided mooring lines and ship hull, the hammock was Mads' heaven, and from here he could sleep to the sirens of the sea. The hammock swung like a sweet sine wave, and soon Mads was sailing his trawler, Maddie's maid, with Cole aside him. And then the storm came again, and Mads was lost alone at sea. Except this wasn't a sea at all. The sea turned into a swarm, and Mads trembled as he dreamed. Mads dreamed of dragonflies. Coming soon, Episode 2 of Two Dead Dogs, The Dragonflies of the Delta.